Building building personal leadership skills increases the program's perceived value. So it's kind of investing in yourself, looking at how you lead and lead the program. In some best practices there of how you can improve yourself and therefore improve the perception of the program. Okay. So let's do a little word cloud here. If you think of the person in your organization who's highly respected as a leader, and that could be at any level, what leadership qualities make them a success? So thinking about those leadership qualities, someone in the organization highly respected, what qualities make them a success? Again, go to menti.com, code is 3167-3438. You should be able to type in a couple of pieces there. All right, we got some coming in. Respect, vision, reliable, trustworthy, friendly, direct, communication, punctual, decisive. Of course, we want our leaders to be decisive, yet empathetic, people who understand what's going on, not only maybe with us, but our clients as well. Give folks just a few more minutes. Liking how trustworthy and reliable right there in the middle and very large. All sorts of things that can give people some respect within the organization. Leadership qualities. Wonderful, great list. And so, obviously these are all qualities that we want to strive for within ourselves, and hopefully that people can, see within ourselves too, as we start promoting the program and the various, work that our volunteers do. Going to talk a little bit though, like a lot of times people get stuck on the difference between and not knowing the difference between leadership and management, because they are two very distinct things. Leadership being a process that's going to help direct and mobilize people or their thoughts and their ideas, versus the management side, where it really is an assessment, or sorry, an assistance to achieve some constant results. I like to think sometimes of leadership as really at that top level, looking at the overall process, and the management by me might be more of that day-to-day type thing, more activity related, where to me the leadership piece can be more of a thought process or putting processes in place that can help lead the organization forward. So I think of parts of leadership would be that strategic planning piece, that there's a process in place where you're going to review what volunteers and staff are doing, on an annual level or 3-year level, whatever the amount of time is. But management would be keeping those pieces moving that are going to support that plan on that day-to-day basis. So a little bit, to me, management is just more task oriented, and the leadership is maybe more of a, not that they're tasked with the leadership, but it's just going to be more of a thought process, and the tasks are done at a higher level. Pieces that leadership do, leaders will set the direction. I mentioned that strategic plan, so it really is setting kind of that vision of where you're going to move forward. And especially in our cases, it's going to be with volunteers. We're setting the direction of where our volunteers are going to go. Another skill that we need to be aware of then is encouraging others to share that agenda with us. And that, of course, would be our volunteers, but we probably want to bring the staff along as well, because if we're operating separately, and haven't shared that, direction with our staff, we can run into issues because they're not going to, come along with us. The volunteers might have that buy-in, but then the staff doesn't. And so it is related to that, is inspiring others to help accomplish whatever that direction is. sometimes that direction can be as simple as having a mission statement and utilizing the organization's mission statement and driving the volunteer activity back to that mission statement. If there's nowhere else to start, if there isn't a strategic plan or whatever, just look at your mission and how can we talk to volunteers about that mission, and then remind staff, this is our mission, this is how we're engaging volunteers in that mission, and move forward that way. Yeah. So let's talk then a little bit about internal networkers. And these are the folks that then can help bring back that buy-in piece. So kind of that encouraging and inspiring others. Internal networkers are the folks that can help us get that done within the organization. And so I think we can probably all think of someone within the organization that can help. They're kind of the individuals who maybe know everyone within the organization or have a good sense of what's going on within the organization. Sometimes that can be you as the volunteer engagement professional. One of the greatest compliments I ever had was one of the executive directors I was working with told me one day that next to her, I was really the only other one who knew what was going on within the organization. So next to her at that executive level, me at the, and I felt very lowly with just the volunteers, that I was the only one who knew what was going on. And I had to know what was going on to be an active engagement professional, so that I knew where I could place volunteers. I knew who needed some capacity building. So that was just me. But so that's one example of an internal networker. But the other one can be someone who can advocate for you. It could be a program lead who is engaging volunteers and you've helped them become successful because you've brought volunteers or your volunteers are working closely with that person. That person could know other individuals and kind of help spread the word throughout the organization. So not only an internal networker, but really an advocate for you in the program and the volunteers. So it's really someone who can help change. They're willing to go on the journey with you. They can help spread the word about how wonderful it is, but then also maybe give you some feedback. They might be people who hear there's a challenge in one part of the organization or somebody's not buying into the whole change. So utilizing them as well to move the program forward. All right, so that was some very lofty and thoughtful things. As we are in a smaller group this morning, I would just encourage people to, raise your hand and I'll call you on here. And if you have any comments, questions, thoughts on what we've just covered here. So again, as I mentioned, that was very lofty. Go ahead, raise your hand here and just share if you have a question, a thought, a comment on what I've just covered. Don't even have to raise your hand. You can just unmute yourself. What thoughts out there? It's like, oh my goodness, I never thought of that. Or what the heck you talking about there, Terry? All right, I'm going to take that as that was straightforward. We're doing well. What I'm going to have you do then is, as I mentioned, I'm going to give you just a few minutes here. What I'd like you to do is to go to that handout too, and then you'll see in the first slot there, it talks about writing down a step that you would take to be a more effective leader. And so let's see here. Let's just give you 3 minutes here. And again, think about it. What step do you feel like you need to take to make yourself an effective leader? All right. I'm going to put 3 minutes on my clock here. And again, either write it down on the form, write it down on another piece of paper. You got 3 minutes to think about what can make you an effective leader. And I won't even want you to do it. All right. I'm just going to hide my face here for a second and I'll be right back. All right, hopefully that gave folks enough time to just at least get one thing down. And what I'd like folks to do, would anybody be willing to share, either just unmute yourself or throw in the chat, one step that you're gonna take to become a more effective leader? Just like to hear an example from someone. Cynthia, you have a smile on your face, so I'm just going to pick on you and ask, could you share with us just one thing?
Okay, so I'm just thinking about our team. I'm really happy, and I'm smiling because I'm really happy because from the last training that we had to today, our staff has changed from 1 in the office to now we have 5, 8. Now we have 8 staff on board, 5 in the office. And one of them is our director of volunteer services. And so I'm just super excited to be able to share this with her. But for me, the step that I can take as a leader in this organization is I have to fully understand the concept of internal networkers. Know it, understand it, so that I can be able to convey that to our director. And this is what our seed carriers look like. This is who they are. And when I'm thinking about the volunteers that we have on our list, and I'm looking at their names, just looking at their names, I can already see who our seed carriers are.
Awesome.
Those people that have that spark, that have that energy, that have that longing, that drive to be, to serve, to give.
Awesome. Great example. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. If you've ever done the Strengths Finders out there by Gallup, I don't know if folks it was quite trendy, not too long ago. I always think of seed carriers too as kind of I believe they're called the wows out there. It's that kind of individual who really has that, it's almost charismatic. It's the woo, sorry. If you've got that woo characteristic, I do see them as seed carriers too. And so thinking of it through that might help as well. Cool. Anybody else? One more person just like to share, throw in the chat. Observation, an aha, a step that you'll take to move forward. Ellen, can I pick on you? Out in Colorado.
So I'm already working on it by learning more about leadership. So like right now I'm doing the Dare to Lead book by Brené Brown. So I think it's more like just developing my own skills and learning.
Great, awesome example. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Brené Brown, boy, are there some really good YouTube videos out on her too. I just I've got to carve out some time myself to start looking at her pieces. So thank you for bringing her up too, and how we lead. So great examples. Thank you both, Cynthia and Ellen, for sharing with us there. So cool. And hopefully others are thinking of it as well as how we can move forward in that area of leadership. Okay. So our next concept then, we've talked a little bit about leadership versus management. It's getting into communication and how we communicate, and communication being that tool for helping us build some credibility, and not only for the volunteer program, but for ourselves as well. Okay. There's the power of language, and I think sometimes we don't stop to think about the language that we use or the language around us, other than the acronyms. I think in any nonprofit organization, any field that we're in, there is the you know, we're Hennepin County Master Gardeners, so people use HCMG, and if you're not within the field, it's, you know, you have no clue what anybody's talking about. So it's kind of that kind of a deal. But thinking about the right language I can use when you're creating a different perception and kind of what you're looking for, and kind of different ways to describe what it is that the volunteers are doing. It's really aligning your language with the leaders and with the decision makers within the organization. But sometimes I think we have to look externally too, if we're being funded externally. And I've got that situation within my own organization. So a couple of examples where language is so key and important. I've shared back when we were talking about position descriptions, my early volunteer engagement was with volunteers who were working with people living with HIV and AIDS. I worked for the Minnesota AIDS Project, and that was my very first volunteer engagement work. So I was rather young at the time, and I was seen as Little Terry Straub. The executive director would call me Little Terry Straub. And part of it was I came from the corporate world, I was working in healthcare, but was seen as corporate, and this was a very nonprofit organization. And I had gone to a training where it's kind of the concept of language was discussed, and it was also kind of learning about agency and organizational culture. Okay, and it dawned on me when I became the director of volunteer services, I wasn't part of the leadership team. And I learned that a lot of decisions were maybe not made of, but thought about not during those leadership team meetings that I wasn't a part of, but in the smoking room of the organization. Because back then, of course, everybody had a smoking room. I also learned that and observed that some of the leaders and the folks who seemed to get a little bit more respect were those who swore. So I learned how to swear and smoke. No, because I already knew how to do those things. But the thing was, I hadn't necessarily shared that with my coworkers. So I started hanging out in the smoke room. And you know, Lord knows what, luckily I didn't have to do it for very long. But the bottom line is I started to switch my perception of how I was perceived with the organization, that I was cool, I could swear, I could smoke. But I could hear what the decision makers were thinking and tried to influence folks that way, or could see who in the room was helping the decision makers make decisions and could go to them with whatever I was going. I'm totally not advocating for you to pick up smoking or swearing if that is something you do not do. But to me, that's an example of learning the language and the culture of the organization. And learned it very on that I could kind of influence and through how I changed my perception. And I stopped being called Little Terry Straub, very honestly. So it worked. But maybe a more professional example would be in my own current position now. So with our Extension Master Gardener volunteers, I'm an employee of the University of Minnesota Extension, but our funding comes from Hennepin County here in Minneapolis. And so I basically feel like I have two bosses. I also, therefore, I'm working for two of the largest bureaucracies in the state of Minnesota. So I have two entities in which to please, and I have to make sure I'm speaking the correct language with whoever I'm talking to at that point in time. So what I've done is with the university is to look at university goals, and I'm lucky we are part of a statewide program, and our statewide program has come up with priorities for which we focus on. So things like horticultural skills, water quality, pollinators. So when I'm talking to people from the university about the difference and the impact that our volunteers are making here in Hennepin County, to them, I talk about horticultural skills, pollinators, water quality. Local food is our theme for the year. So the university ears perk up when they hear that language. The county, on the other hand, has a county plan, one of which is they're looking at environment and environmental sustainability related to climate change here within the county. But they also have goals related to health, as well as access to information. Two things that we know our Extension Master Gardeners can impact. So gardening is healthy. It's not only helps you eat healthy, but you move around when you garden. There's a form of exercise. There's data that talks about the importance of being in nature. And so that affects our health. And then access to knowledge. Our volunteers are at farmers markets, community festivals. So we're help connecting people to those university resources. So when I talk to the county, I put it in that language. We're creating and helping healthy citizens. We're giving citizens access to information from the University of Minnesota. Another big help then has been when I present, I have to do this quarterly to our funders. I will put the university goal and the county goal side by side and then list where we are with our Master Gardener volunteers and how that impacts. So it's really adapting your language to those decision makers. One final example would be the issue of money or the saving of money and how volunteers can, I always think of volunteers as building capacity and not necessarily saving money, but they can contribute back to the organization. So again, it's understanding what your funders or what your leaders want to hear about. Some leaders want to hear about the bottom line, what's the volunteer savings or how are they impacting that bottom dollar? Where others want to hear about more of the stories about the impact that volunteers are making. And there are probably some that want to hear both. But hopefully 3 different examples there about how important language is when it comes to advocating for your program and with volunteers. Okay. At this point, and I think I have the ability to do this, and if not, Chris or Wendy will need to help me out. What I would like to do is to put folks into some small breakout rooms here for a few minutes and probably give you 5 to 6 minutes to discuss things. But I'd like folks to just talk about some powerful language, weak language, and then some communication vehicles that you might utilize within your organization. So what is some powerful language that you could use to describe your volunteer program and what it accomplishes? I talked about I use my county goals, I use our state priorities when I talk about it. Maybe some weak language to avoid using, so swearing might be one of those. Or communication vehicles. What could you use to position the program not only in the organization, but maybe outside to the public? So it's kind of that internal, external. And so I'll put these 3 in the chat. I can do that right now. And Wendy, could you help with the rooms there? Great. Yeah, very good. A reminder there, Chris, to put your cameras on as you go. Let me see, powerful language. And we've got weak language. And then communication vehicles. Oops, sorry, communication vehicles. My spelling is never good when period. So anyway, there you go. All right, we'll send you off for about 6 minutes here and talk about those 3. When you come back, we'll just kind of have a little discussion of what folks found worked and didn't. Okay, thank you. All right, looks like we have everybody back, so thank you. What I'd like to hear is, could somebody share just one thing when it comes to powerful language? Any thoughts out there when it comes to what you're doing and the work that you do? What would be considered powerful language to describe the program and what volunteers do?
Shall I jump in?
Go for it, Cynthia. Thank you. You get the gold star for the day.
Powerful language for us here at Recovery Community Network really is about recovering together. There is no one single pathway of recovery that's right or good for everybody. Everybody has their different forms of recovery, different pathways to recovery, and they are all accepted and included in our program and here at Recovery Community Network.
Wonderful. Great example. Cool. Any others? All right. How about weak language? Any examples of weak language out there that folks thought that they would want to steer away from, not use when it comes for advocating for the program?
Terry, I'll jump in. I notice like I'm a big, I recognize very passive language. So if we're using should, could, might, may, or the always, never, like the very permanent language that you have to, like, I try to avoid the passive and then not overly emphasize the too strong of the always and nevers.
Good examples. That passive language can just work against us. And yeah, I've been called on that one too. And just kind of sometimes it's just how we're brought up or whatever, our family of origin pieces. One of my pet peeves is with working with volunteers, and volunteers tend to do this more often than I've heard volunteer engagement professionals, but I've heard it in the profession as well, is using "I'm just a volunteer." And I get it that people, it's a good way to say I don't want to take on more responsibility because I'm just a volunteer. And it's true, people are giving us their time, their skills, etc. I understand it, but it also is so weak. It just really lowers you. And so I always try to turn that around and say, you're more than just a volunteer. You're a active gardener, you've got XYZ skills, and that kind of gets their attention sometimes. So that's, yeah, great examples there. Communication vehicles. What are folks using to get the word out about the importance of their volunteer program or volunteers? Communication tools that folks are using.
One of the things that I'm with Thriving United in Midland, Texas, and one of the things that we do is we just try to participate in all the activities that are going on within our community. We go and we not only ask if they need volunteers, but we also try to set up a table, and so we can have brochures and just it's a fun activity to participate in. And it reaches out to the community, and then we get to we get to see what they're doing as well in the community by participating.
Awesome. That's just a great example because you're then in community, and I think that's it's just so easy, especially these times with coming during the COVID times. It's really hard to be in community when, of course, you couldn't without a mask or gloves, or especially indoors. There's a lot of barriers though. So be able to go out and to be part of the community, wonderful. Some other examples out there too would be like doing an annual report. Thinking of a way that you could communicate to leaders both within the organization or outside is creating your own annual report, or be part of the organization's annual report, so that everybody knows the great work that you're doing. Another piece to be aware of too is just being part of a website, that there is a volunteer link. And I think a lot of times we just forget, or people just don't think of us, but that we're part of the organizational website, and all it has to be is a link to someone's email, just so that somebody could inquire. I mean, that's the basic, but if you can be promoting the great work that you're doing via your website, or you know, even if there's a volunteer newsletter that's available on the website, just somewhere that shows that the organization is utilizing volunteers, a lot of times it can just be forgot that we're doing that. So don't forget those communication tools like that. All right, we'll give you just a couple of minutes here then to have you think about what would make you a better communicator within the organization. And to take out your handout number 2, there's a space on that for you to write this one down. I'm going to set my timer 2 minutes. Think through a quick little discussion here about communication. What is it that you can do to be a better communicator when advocating for your volunteer program? Give you 2 minutes. Cynthia, the question there is about communication. How can you be a better communicator within the organization when it comes to volunteers, volunteerism? Okay, that was about 2 minutes there, folks. You know, as we're nearing up on the at 11 o'clock hour here, I'm gonna encourage us to do just a little bit of a stretch break. For those of you, if you want to keep writing about communication tools, you are more than welcome to do so. But let's just take a little stretch break here for about 4 minutes, and we'll just pause everything. We'll get started up again at 11 a.m. So just take a little stretch your legs break, and we'll be right back. All right, we will continue. It is at 11 o'clock hour. Okay, so moving along then, we've talked about leadership, we've talked about communication. Let's discuss some tools that are out there that you can use that make the volunteer program highly respected and valued within the organization. This is something you don't have to do alone, that you've got some tools out there to help you. And we'll just spend a little time going through those and give you time to try out one of those in your handouts, okay? So number 1, and this is will give you some time to do a little bit of work, is to do a self-assessment of the program, okay? And you've got in your handouts attachment D, which is a self-evaluation. And so what I'd like you to do is just take a couple of minutes, pull that self-evaluation out, and take a look at it and evaluate yourself. So what is in that evaluation? You know, the title of it is around volunteer management skills. I think there is part of that, but there's also some leadership skills in there with that. So we'll just give you, let's say 3 minutes or so to take a look at that self-evaluation. Again, it's in your handouts and it's towards the end or where the attachment's in. Attachment D. There's 2 self-evaluations there, but I'm gonna have you focus on that attachment D. Give you a couple minutes, just look through that, evaluate yourself, and come back. Okay, so I will pause us there, and we'll give you 4 minutes to review that evaluation. Thanks.
I'll share.
Great,
So
thank you.
I'm the admin coordinator for Utah Support Advocates for Recovery Awareness, USARA in Utah. And I started in July of 2020 during the pandemic. So we haven't really had a set volunteer program other than our family support program that someone else manages. So I would be in charge of this whenever we start opening up fully again. So I feel like this is good for me to view before that actually happens, because, you know, I don't really know what it's like yet to be a supervisor to volunteers. So
Sure.
yeah.
Awesome, Teresa. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, hopefully it is good things to think through, especially before that hands-on, and then sometimes even after you've had the hands-on, to just kind of go back and go, oh, I need to learn more and or not, or I am doing good, or I feel like I've got a handle on this area. Thank you. Anyone else have a aha, or you know, I want to do more in this area than what I'm currently doing? All right, well, we'll continue to move on. I encourage you to, you know, do both of those self-evaluations, maybe share it with others that you work with. You could even share it with some leadership volunteers. But just, it is a nice reflective thing to just kind of think through, where are we, where am I in my skill set, and then do something about that if you feel you're lacking in some area. Okay, the second part then of building that credibility is to make sure that you've got essential policies that, you know, are in place. I think in most organizations, we do have some kind of a volunteer handbook. If not, start considering to create one. Sometimes those handbooks need to be revamped. And so always good to review those on a annual basis. If you don't have one, and you know, are looking for a place to start, a lot of times you could look at an employee handbook, because in general, sometimes the policies that are in place for our paid employees are also going to be the same for non-paid folks, like our volunteers. So that could be, you know, just simple things like use of alcohol when volunteering, or you know, showing up on time, that kind of a thing. Or even just combining, if you have your position descriptions hopefully are in place, making that part of a volunteer manual. But the bottom line is to think through, what do you need to have in place that's going to be essential for volunteers to be successful. Okay. The third, conduct an internal audit of the volunteer program. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that. There is in your handouts attachment E, that's an internal audit. And so that would be one way to do it. We do an annual meeting with volunteers, anyone who wants to show up to kind of just do almost like a focus group, but also sometimes we'll have more of a led discussion, and that could, you know, help us lead into an annual plan, or right now we're currently working with a 3-year strategic plan. But just to really get a sense of what it is that's going on with the volunteers and maybe how they're feeling about the program. Another thought would be just to conduct an annual survey. And I found that our folks rather enjoy being asked, how things are doing. We tend to do one every year, but every other year it's maybe more extensive, so we can really, see shifts in what it is that and how volunteers are feeling about the program. It's also helped us shift maybe the type of volunteerism that we're doing, or where we're working with volunteers. Even let's just as far back, maybe 10 years ago, we were not working in community gardens. Well, now we're coming up on working about 40 community gardens across the county. And so it's just kind of a shift in where people want to spend their time. And for me personally, it's actually, we get more value in helping people grow their own food versus, just making the front yard look pretty, or, kind of that visionary stuff that we want things to look good. All right. Other things to think through is to, develop your own philosophy on volunteerism, a volunteer philosophy statement. And you'll see in your handouts, there's an example of that, but it's kind of your own personal, this is how I feel about volunteerism and volunteers. Get involved in strategic planning. A lot of organizations do not engage not only their volunteers in the strategic planning process, but even the staff who are, working with volunteers. And for me personally, it's such a lost opportunity, because I find that volunteers give us, are just going to be more honest when it comes in the strategic piece than our paid staff. Because paid staff, you've got that that check, our salaries are attached to feedback. And sometimes it takes a lot of guts to give honest feedback to those that are above you and, are holding the purse strings or that power of that paid check. Volunteers aren't necessarily engaged that way, and they may really love volunteering for the organization, but if so they have nothing to lose if they give honest feedback, and it's rare that anybody would be let go for giving honest feedback. So do engage not only yourself but the volunteers. I think it's important for you yourself to show that you're invested in where the organization is going as well, and have that conversation with the powers that be. And then last but not least, use a variety of impact and outcome measurement statements. Again, we have in your handouts attachment G, that the visioning for program success. There's all sorts of ways to talk about your impact, the outcomes. Immediately we fall back on numbers and hours. That's so built into my own organization, because volunteers have to have a bottom line of 25 hours of service to remain certified with our program. So it's very easy for us to focus on that, but our challenge is going beyond that. It's kind of the so what did those 25 hours get us? What did they get the community? And so to be able to go back and talk about the impact that the volunteers made. And so as you can imagine, with gardening, there's all sorts of pieces. We're looking at food that's donated. That's, as I mentioned earlier, a theme for the year. We're measuring food. Last year, volunteers donated over a ton to food shelves and to public housing here in Minneapolis. This year, we're going to take it a step further and talk about, okay, what did that ton of food do? How many meals or how many families were fed because of that, and the outcome of that? So again, it's that for us, it's that healthy access to fresh produce. But what are the impacts within your own organization? We'll do again here is just give you 2 minutes to return and look at your handout 2, and jot down, what of those 6 things that we talked about, what are you going to do? Now, we started out with you're doing that self-assessment, so you got 1 off the list. So what else can you do? You're going to look at those policies and procedures. Are you going to do an internal audit? Are you going to write your own philosophy of volunteers? What about strategic planning? Are you going to get yourself engaged in that? Variety of outcomes and impacts. How can you start sharing that? So just a couple of minutes here. We'll just give you a little break. Just jot those down so you have a record of what some next steps might be for you. All right. Hopefully folks had a chance to get something down and think about those next steps to move your program forward. In our last 45 minutes or so together here, we're going to start talking about developing a case statement for and advocating with key messages, that can lead to increased resources for your volunteer program. Okay, kind of look at this internally, but it could also be externally. What kind of a case statement do we need to help develop that ask when it comes to getting increased resources for us within the organization? The things that we've talked about previously all contribute to that. So we've talked about leadership, our leadership skills, talked about our communication, and then just lastly, there are some tools that we could put in place that can help us bring more value to the organization, or to help bring up the perceived value of volunteers within the organization. So we're going to end here with our time together. It's just kind of thinking about a case statement that we could make when it comes to advocating for our volunteers. So a thing to think through here is that just starting with, competent leaders and managers build capacity to maximize resources. So by building our skills and being skillful individuals, we can help build the capacity of the volunteer program. Organizations have to effectively recruit, focus, and support our volunteer services. We know that. Mobilizing citizens to volunteer is very challenging. I think you all know that firsthand, but we often have to remind others about how challenging that it is, and it takes skills to do that. Volunteers need support and leadership to be effective and to sustain their involvement. So this all doesn't just happen alone. We need people like ourselves, organizations need people like ourselves to support the volunteer activity to make that effective. And then volunteers are that necessary and critical resource for healthy communities. Research shows people that engage in the community not only brings health to themselves, but to the community as well. So there's really 5 areas that help build that case for volunteers. And when we think about a statement, we kind of want to try and address those pieces within our statement, and how we can bring that more effective when we talk to others, be more effective when it comes to building the capacity of the program and getting resources. I'd like you to just stop and think about, what value do volunteers bring to your organization? But just off the top of your head, talk about what value are volunteers bringing to your organization. Again, that's going to that menti.com, the code 3167-3438, just put in there. What value do you see volunteers? What value could you share with others that volunteers are bringing to the organization? So menti.com with the code 3167-3438. What value are volunteers bringing to the organization? Oh, all sorts of great stuff. Diversity, key, yeah. Many times our organizations have a lack of diversity, and volunteers can help build that. Life experience, I love the word authenticity there too, just in the work especially that you're doing. Those community resources, wisdom. I love to see the word excitement, because I feel sometimes around the time I might be feeling a little down or on the edge of burnout, I interact with a volunteer and they're still just so darn excited and about what they're doing. It brings me up as well. Or we do a lot of volunteer interviewing at the end of the year, and that's kind of, I might be a little tired because we've had an exciting year, and just meeting those potential volunteers can go a long way. It's got a lot of great different ideas there when it comes to the whole piece of the value that volunteers are bringing. The perspective, passion, light shines through them. Awesome. So just some great words there that you can think about when you start talking about what volunteers are bringing, and kind of taking it from beyond some of the maybe, I would say that these are some of this is emotional words or very powerful words, and how can you use these words to get into the messages that you're taking, you know, above and beyond. Okay. There are things that you might advocate for, and what I'll have you do is put in the chat maybe some ideas, other ideas you have, but what are some things that you might be considering advocating for? Is it resources for the program, maybe more staff, more funding? Is it prioritizing racial equity and volunteerism? Has the organization even looked at that? So are there ways that that could be prioritized? And you need the powers that be to make that possible. Is it getting a seat at the decision-making table for yourself? Or maybe it's adding a volunteer onto that decision-making table. Is it increasing capacity through volunteers? So having more volunteers within the organization, maybe you need to get more staff, paid staff engaged with increasing that capacity that volunteers can do. Are you including volunteers in professional development? Do they get to go to the same trainings that paid staff are? Or could they deliver some professional development? Maybe it's a skill set that you don't have within the organization. A volunteer could do that. Use the chat and share with me some other ideas that folks have about utilizing volunteers. Funding, yes, getting more resources for the volunteer program. Other thoughts, ways that that you might advocate for the volunteer program. Other things that's not on the screen there. Other ideas you might have or needs that you might have that have been sparked this morning. Peer support, giving rides. It sounds like some new programming. Kind of getting back to maybe that capacity piece. But you might need to advocate to start doing that with volunteers. Getting greater community engagement, engaging maybe the whole organization and helping you with that, advocating for that type of activity. An example I have for my own work is that up until recently, I was the only paid individual working with our Master Gardener volunteers here in Hennepin County. And our numbers have continued to increase with the number of people wanting to be a volunteer with us. And I've been with the program for about 16 years. But when I started, we had under 200 volunteers. It was about 175. We now have 672 on the books. And so it became real clear once I hit around 500 that we started needing some more resources, and that resources needed to be staff because it just I needed some assistance. So I had to put a plan together to advocate for, and I now have a full-time person assisting me as well. So so it can be done, but we had to look at the language of it and really think through about what an individual would do and what the county would get out of by adding that individual. Okay. All right. Another thought, what I'd like you to just think about here is think of a decision maker who's important to the future of your organization. And this can be internally or externally. It's important maybe to the future of the volunteer program within the organization. And just jot down, I would like blank to know blank. So that could be a person's name, it could be a position. It could be, I would like Bob to know more about the volunteer program. Or I would like our funders to know the value of our volunteers. Think about that a little bit, and then I'll just ask people to share when you're ready. Examples of who you would like, and then what you would like them to know. What examples do you have out there? Could be real simple. I would like our executive director to know their volunteers with their organization. or you could take it beyond. I would like our executive director to know volunteers are building capacity. Other thoughts out there of who you would like and what you would like them to know? Any examples? You can either shout it out there or put it in the chat. Cynthia, can I call on you? Do you have an example of?
You must be seeing me thinking.
Oh, sorry about that.
I was just thinking, so I have to ask myself the questions, right? So who
Right.
are our decision makers? And what about RCN? Do I want this person or the public to know? So as I was thinking about the decision makers, I'm thinking about our funders, definitely our funders, and our board of directors. They are important, and also driving a lot of the fundraising because they carry weight in the communities. And so what do I want them to know? Because they are instrumental in getting us the resources that we need. And
What's you?
Yeah,
Sounds
so-
like mine.
what do I want our
Mine's
board of
always on.
directors mostly, what do I want them to know about what's happening right now with RCN?
Great example. Yeah, sometimes we forget about the board. Does the board even know about the volunteer program, or do they see themselves as volunteers? Out of that kind of a piece too. And a lot of times they are the purse string holders and just need to know. So awesome example. Thank you. So hopefully folks have other examples of that, of people they need to, they might need to advocate to. Sometimes it could be outside the organization, maybe even legislature. In my case, we have what's called an extension committee, and these are made up of representatives of all the county commissioners. And so I need to think through, okay, what do county commissioners need to know? What I've started as just at a base level is that when volunteers record their hours with us, I ask them to act about where the activity took place, in which part of the county. So I can go to each commissioner and say, hey, do you know we did X, Y, and Z. We served this community garden that, you know, raised so many pounds of food, and with that food, they gave it to this food shelf, who then went and served so many families, increasing the health here in Hennepin County. We have an example in the chat. You'd like volunteers to know they're the heart of the organization. Yes, that could be another way too, is turning it back. You want volunteers to know how great that they're doing. So again, and that's a real big piece of retention anymore these days, is really sharing with people the impact that they're making on the organization. And sometimes the data that we're collecting, or the examples that we have, where that we would take to funders or the powers that be, can also go back to the volunteers. And that's real important with today's volunteers. So great examples. All right. So we're going to work a little bit on just developing a case statement for our volunteers. And so you can just start with that, clearly stating what needs to change. And I mentioned that, you know, in my case, I needed to get some help. That for years, as as the program was growing with more and more volunteers, I had to really depend on volunteers to assist me with volunteer management. So I really had, and I continue to this day to utilize this, but I have a system of middle managers, I would call them, of volunteers. So these are volunteers leading other volunteers, because I could just not do it on my own. So for my statement, I was like, we need to build the capacity of staff, which was me, to engage more volunteers, because last year we had 185 people apply for our program. The year before was just 86. So you can see we have a little trend here going on. Not sure if it's COVID driven or just what it is, but people want to know where their food's coming from, and so it's increasing. It created a sense of urgency, and part of that was just our numbers are doubling almost, and that just my capacity to do that on my own needed to change. And part of it, the important pieces of the program, as I was mentioning with that community garden piece, those volunteers really needed support because they knew how to grow vegetables, but we had to start talking about how you work in community and kind of get rid of this top-down business that some of our volunteers have, that people who were already gardening do know how to garden. So it's this sense of we're bringing university resources, but we're not imposing those resources. We might know what works in Minnesota, but we also want to hear what the community members, how they want to garden, and we can help them maybe garden just a little differently, or but we're not imposing our thoughts on those. So we had to do some training around that. I needed someone to help me with that. That was part of my supporting reasons for that change. That without that, then we would lose our work in community gardens, which is key to what we do, which also helps build into the future vision that when we work with diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of those volunteers that are in community gardens come from different communities than our current volunteers. So by engaging people differently, we might actually increase the diversity in the program by folks from various communities wanting to join us and be part of that. So think through that in your own individual programs. What needs to change? Is there a sense of urgency that you can add to it? And then give some supporting reasons for that change. And then create a future vision for you. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to just jot a few things down around this case statement, because what we'll do is put you in some small groups and you can have a conversation with each other and actually role play your case statement. Envision yourself giving it to someone that could make a difference, either financially or when it comes to staff. And we'll go from there. So I'll give you, let's set the timer here for 3 minutes. Just come up with a very quick statement. You can think about going back to the other piece of who is it that you want to know X. And this is more or less the X, that's that case statement. What needs to change, sense of urgency, what are the supporting reasons you got, and create a vision for the future. Got about 3 minutes here. All right, hopefully folks have had a chance to get something down in writing. What we'll do then is have some breakout rooms here, and Wendy will find a partner for you. So we'll put you in groups of 2 or 3, Wendy, whatever you think will work here. Share that who you would like to know and what you'd like them to know, and then give your short case statement and see what happens here. After a few minutes, you can change roles. We'll give you, let me see, I'll give you about 6 minutes. So you each have 3 minutes, and then you can share. All right, take her away there, Wendy. I had to make sure my sound was on. So welcome back, folks. I'd like to just hear a little bit, if people wouldn't mind sharing what they heard or even just discussed within your little breakouts there. Anyone have a good example of something that someone was going to do or someone was going to talk about when it came to advancing their program, their volunteers?
Hi. One of the things that I put down is that, we're better together, and that means not being ignorant as far as, the LGBT groups as well, and to ask them what they would need from us instead of just assuming what they need from us. And then just, communication within both areas of being, what can I do to help you help others as well, instead of just assuming.
Very good. Do you feel like you have to get someone's permission to do that, or is that'll be an easy piece to just implement, having those conversations within the community?
I think it'll be easy, as long as your heart's in it whenever you're talking to them and stuff,
Sure.
and just showing them, what our organization is about, and that everyone's welcome. It's for all hearts and habits.
Very good. Awesome. Thank you. Another example of something that somebody's going to advocate for, conversations you're going to have with someone. I'd love to hear it. Oh, go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Ours is more about logistics. So using Stephen Covey's model, beginning with the end in mind, what I wrote is really to create, not only to have a healthy, robust volunteer program, but to create a self-initiated type of tracking or logging in system so that it can track all our volunteer hours. So we don't have to pencil and paper it every single day or every time somebody comes in. So beginning with that in mind and then working our way back is what we talked about.
Is there somewhere that you need to go for advocating for that, or something you can just implement yourselves?
No, so I would definitely present it to the leaders of the organization, or the leader and or board of directors. Right now, our acting executive director, but so that we can either get funding or we can get the person brought in to build the program.
Sure. Yep.
That's something that we really want to, that would be very beneficial for the organization. It would be save time, and it would be driven by the volunteers. It would really be able to just do all their own tracking.
Very good. Awesome. And yeah, change is hard. So it's not only hard to ask for it, but then, once you have a system that you're going to move to, it can be interesting. But with all of this, is that no matter what the idea, no matter what you're advocating for, is to truly to remember to have, write it down, think it through, think through that message. And, the worst that can happen is that somebody's going to say no. Great. Give it some time and keep trying. Try again. Can you tweak the message? Can you approach it differently? Is there a different person you need to talk to? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that no is not a failure. It's just, it's maybe a pause. There's just might be another way to go about it. So last tip when it comes to these messages too is I think the place to start, of course, is with yourself, but do get engagement from others and get feedback on what that statement is going to be. It could be from volunteers themselves, might be another staff person. You know, we talked earlier about those seed carriers. Could it be those internal networkers? Get feedback from them. And they can help craft that message or get it to a place where it might be, I don't know, especially if somebody would say no, go back to them and find out what they would maybe do differently. So. All right, just a few more pieces here for you. I went and looked at what we were talking about this time last year when it came to this topic and kind of the impact of COVID on this module of positioning your program for success. And you'll see on the left-hand side there, you've got the different key components of the module, and they're pretty much what we've talked about this morning: acting like a leader, using that powerful language to communicate, making those strong case statements to move your program forward. And so just a couple of things to remember. You know, we're kind of going back out now into the world. We're kind of in this post-COVID piece, but I still think it's a good reminder. You know, like I mentioned, for us, we're not going back to the office until September, so I still need to keep these in my mind. So it might be helpful just, you know, remember to keep connected with your key decision makers, whether that's by email, doing Zoom calls or whatever, even if it's just sending your newsletter, whatever you communicate with volunteers. Remember that those decision makers are still out there. You just might not be seeing them on a daily basis, especially if you're sharing an office. Do keep track of ways that you've been engaging your volunteers during these times. We really did a shift with our program last year, and so we've been sharing that a lot this year of how, while volunteers could not be educating in person, they were either doing it online or we're helping to get that excess produce into food shelves and into locations here within the city of Minneapolis. And then remember to share those value adds that volunteers provide. And that's kind of what we did, is we shifted and kind of helped fill a gap. A lot of folks use the word pivot. So we just kind of switched what we were doing, either pivoting and putting things out there online or pivoting what volunteers were actually doing. As I mentioned, we're educational focus. It's really rare that we have done, you know, hands-on type of activities such as maintenance. And at the beginning of this year, we shifted and allowed people to do maintenance pieces because it's something they could do on their own and not have to interface necessarily with folks. So just think through maybe some different ways to communicating, and especially then as we have to jumpstart going forward, you know, what happened when we were shut down? How are we going to move forward? Another piece just to think about here and this is a plug for one of our MAVA programs, is the Service Enterprise, and it's kind of taking things to the next level. And the Service Enterprise does help people think through this. And so it is working with MAVA to do an assessment, to provide some training and coaching and some national certification. And so the folks that brought us today can, you know, contact MAVA, look for more of that on their Service Enterprise website. But just a good reminder that this was just kind of a taste of where this can all lead. And there's always more work to do when it comes to moving our volunteer programs forward. Thanks, Wendy. Wendy has that in the chat for us. All right, just a review of what we've been doing here this morning. 4 components to positioning your program within the organization. Number 1 is to act like a leader, be influential in your organization. You got to act like a leader, whether you are one or not. Act like it, and it can help you within the program. Do use that powerful language to describe what it is that our volunteers do. Come from a position of power rather than weakness. Use those tools like the self-assessment we did to build your program's quality and the credibility. And lastly, develop a strong case statement for those decision makers about the value of your program and investing in volunteers. With that, are there any questions out there? I'll stop my share and put them in the chat or unmute yourself. Anything that I can answer about what we presented this morning? Alrighty then, thank you all so much for your attention this morning, and I will be back tomorrow, I believe, with a panel of folks that you can also ask us questions. So happy to see you then. But thank you so much. Good luck to you all, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I do want to send say a reminder that each month on the fourth Wednesday of the month, we have our Ask the Expert sessions with different volunteer extraordinaires that come alongside us from MAVA. So that's just an open forum. It is a 90-minute session from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Central. Like I said, on the fourth Wednesday every month, where you can just come in and have access to these experts and ask them really specific, detailed questions about your volunteer program, what might be happening, and they can troubleshoot and problem solve with you so that you can take this learning and, like Terry said too, take it to that next level. So if you can join us, again, the next one is tomorrow. Starts at 11 a.m. Central, and then Cindy has emailed out access to our landing page for this learning collaborative, which has links to all of our Zoom meetings. If you have any questions, do reach out to Cindy, myself, Wendy. Any of us can get you to the right place if you're interested in attending as well. I think that's it for today. So thank you so much.
Thanks again, everybody.